Hey, this is Manny with Not Waiting to Live. I'm a former Mercedes-Benz car salesman, and in this video, I'm going to cover the 4 things that you need to know before buying a car out of state. Now, buying a car out of state is a common practice. I've sold cars to people out of state. I've bought cars out of state myself. This is a great way to increase your market, find cars that aren't available around you, find cars that are for a cheaper price outside of your area, or find cars that are just in a general better condition than what you can find in your area. I mean, I've got a 94 Jeep Wrangler, spent his whole life down in Florida. The amount of rust on that vehicle is so much less than what can be found in this part of the country. And I just think buying a car out of state in general is a great way for a lot of people to expand their options and get the car that they want. Now, the risks that people take on when buying a car out of state, one, they could potentially waste the time, money, energy, effort that goes into traveling out of state, because if they show up and the car isn't what they expected or had hoped for, or they failed to disclose something that they needed to know, that money and time, energy, effort's down the drain. The other potential pitfall is that you end up buying a car that you ultimately can't register in your state for a number of reasons. And so I'm going to cover these 4 topics. Let's show you an outline here of what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about safety inspections and emission requirements. Then we'll talk about negotiation and how that's mostly the same, but there's one little additional step that you should take to protect yourself. Then I'll talk about trade-ins and shipping, whether you're trading in a car out of state or having a car delivered to you and then trading in a car, or just having a car shipped from another dealership to the dealership that's closest to you. Talk about all that. And then finally, I'll close with taxes and registration, because this is the step that you cannot trust your dealer to execute properly. You need to come in with some previous education, because if you don't end up paying the right amount, you're going to have to end up paying the right amount eventually, and that could lead you to not only paying more than you expect, but maybe more than you borrowed and can't afford to pay. So all of this is going to help you make a decision, the right decision, when you're buying a car out of state. And again, none of this is meant to scare you, because this is something that a lot of people do. They do successfully with good results. But let's just dive in to emissions and safety inspections. So there are states that require no safety inspections. There are states that require annual safety inspections. The rules in this country vary not only by state, but also by county. So here in Cuyahoga County, I'm in Cleveland, there are different emission requirements than the rest of the state. And when I brought that Jeep up here, before I could register that vehicle, I failed the nitrogen dioxide emissions requirements. And the reason that happened was somebody had stolen, at some point in the vehicle's life, had stolen the catalytic converter. So that is something that thieves like to steal for the platinum. I actually did it at Mercedes when I was there too. They steal it from beneath the Sprinter vans, they'll steal them from Home Depot vans, whatever. All you need to know is that the transfer, just because a vehicle is titled and registered in a specific area, doesn't mean that it can cleanly be transferred and registered where you live now. I mean, common things that are overlooked in states that require safety inspections are going to be the window tint. Does the horn work properly? Make sure you test that out. The lights might be functional, but are they cracked? Is the windshield cracked to a point where it's no longer safe in that particular state? You also need to look at, if you're buying a salvage title or a car that's been rebuilt. So let's say you go, to some guy's got a TV show in California, he builds you a custom car and you want to take it with you back to New Hampshire. You need to make sure that the state regulations are going to permit that type of vehicle. And they do vary state by state. So if you have questions about what is possible in your state, leave a comment below and I'll help you sort that answer out. Now, next topic, negotiation. I cover all things car negotiation on this channel. So whether you're buying new or used, a lease, out of state, the process is going to be largely similar. I do have a video on my channel where I talk about and cover the best way to negotiate by email. I tell you exactly what to say, and I've negotiated out of state by email myself. I mean, when I was hiking the PCT, I negotiated the price of my Ford Transit van. Ultimately, months later, ended up flying out. They picked me up from the airport. I've had the van ever since. I loved it. That was back when I was dead set on living in a van before I met my fiance, who will not live in a van. But that's neither here nor there. So the extra step, though, when you are negotiating out of state is in the preparation. And I talk about negotiation is really all about alternatives and your ability to walk away. So when you are taking the time to travel out of state and potentially risk that time, energy, effort you put into traveling out of state, and you're talking about alternatives, call in advance to make sure those alternatives still exist. Because if you're like, well, if you're trying to leverage another available offer to lower a price, any dealership worth their salt is going to call that dealership to make sure it's still there. It's one thing to be listed online. That doesn't mean that it's still there or that the details are actually accurate, what they're showing you. So make sure that that alternative exists when you're negotiating against it, because when you spend all the time to travel there, you can't really walk away, or at least it's a lot more difficult, and you got to be a much better artist at bluffing at that point. But even if you do walk away, you can always come back 5 minutes later and say you changed your mind. So just be prepared, but you can achieve the general same results negotiating out of state. It's never going to be as good as if you're negotiating in person, because presence is customer leverage. It is harder for a dealer to turn down someone who's physically standing in front of them as opposed to somebody who's just emailing them. But you can still largely get most of the benefits of negotiation out of state. Let's talk about trade-ins and shipping. So there are actually a wide range of options buying out of state. Now, I personally, as a salesperson, I've driven a car from Cleveland to Saginaw, Michigan. I think it's like right up where the thumb is, or the crease of the thumb, and had everything worked out. We had agreed to the price in advance over the phone, but he wanted to test drive, wanted to see it in person, and I drove it up there, even financed it. We had all the paperwork in a folder. Once we did the test drive, he signed it over. I drove his trade-in back. So we had agreed to the price of his trade-in in advance too. And in general, dealerships are willing to work with people. I mean, they're doers. They're trying to get a deal done. They're very flexible, open-minded, creative people a lot of the times in terms of getting something done. So if you take videos of your car in advance, take some pictures, try to disclose all the information that you can possibly think of, you can get a pretty good price for what that trade-in would be worth, even if it's out of state. So we've done deals where someone will deliver a car to them on the back of a truck, have that truck unloaded, have the driver have you sign the paperwork, take the trade-in that you have loaded on the truck, bring it back to us. In general, you're going to see shipping charges, whether you're having to ship to yourself or ship between another dealer. It's going to range between $1 to $2 a mile, generally in the range of $500 to $2,000. And that really depends on where it's coming from, where it's going. But that just kind of gives you an idea of the premium that you would have to bear. So even if you're working with a dealership at a manufacturer dealership that has a network of vehicles, so they might have another vehicle out of state, a lot of times they're willing to trade for that vehicle. There does need to be an incentive that makes sense for both parties. For example, when I was at Mercedes, we traded one time with a dealer from New Jersey who had a 4x4. That was a limited supply vehicle, something we could sell for full sticker price. To give that up, we had to give that dealer a van of ours that was more fully loaded, passenger van that had some manufacturer incentives that would have been a more profitable van, but there had to be a trade that made sense. And the shipping that took place between those two dealerships was just a premium that the buyer would have to bear. But if you're going to get something you can't get otherwise, that premium makes sense a lot of times. The last thing I want to talk about here is such a big thing. It's such a broad and diverse topic that I do have to cover the tax elements in a different video, but I want to talk about broadly how you prepare yourself. And tax laws are so incredibly diverse, maybe more so than most people realize per state. So most states will, if you're buying a new car, they will only tax the trade-in difference on the vehicle. So if you're trading in buying a new car for 50, you trade in a used car for 25, you only pay taxes on 25. There's other states that make you pay taxes on the full 50. There are states that if you get a manufacturer rebate, you owe taxes on that. If you don't get a manufacturer rebate, you don't owe or if there are other states that don't charge you taxes on the manufacturer rebate. There are taxes for leases where you get sales tax on just the amount that you've leased. So the difference between the capitalized amount and the residual value. And I have a separate video where I cover lease negotiation on this channel. That was my first car video I put out a couple years ago. You need to prepare yourself for not just your state taxes, which the amounts vary dramatically, from 0% to 8, 9, 10% sales tax, but you also need to prepare yourself to understand those nuances, because in the localities where there might be additional sales taxes charged, because this dealer, they don't specialize in transactions in your random state, city and state. They have a good idea, they've got some books, but they can make mistakes. And the two most common ways that this works out is if they're dealing with a state. So if you're in a state and you're buying from another state that has reciprocity with each other, they're probably more versed and familiar with how the laws are going to work out. They're going to be able to withhold the appropriate balance. They're going to push it ahead to the Department of Motor Vehicles in your other state. And that is going to be the amount that you paid in taxes, and you'll be able to register the vehicle there, assuming that everything else checks out. There are other states, even if they don't have reciprocity, a lot of times the state is just going to look at proof of residence. And that's a whole nother story about documentation and proving where you live and what's acceptable and what's not and what gets by. So if you have some questions about that, ask it in the comment section below. But in the states where there's not necessarily reciprocity, it doesn't mean you're going to get double taxed. They're just going to say, hey, we'll let you go without paying taxes, but you're not going to be able to register this vehicle in your state until you pay the appropriate amount of taxes. That might be a problem for you if you're not if you need that amount. So it could be thousands of dollars. If you have to now pay that out of pocket because it wasn't included in your car loan, you need to know that, because that is a significant outcome that could just affect you personally. But in general, you're not going to be able to scheme this and go to a place like Oregon or New Hampshire where there aren't sales taxes and get away with it without everything being accounted for. And even, I know in Cuyahoga County, I had this problem, ran into this problem where they have undefined rules about moving registrations in a short amount of time, an undefined amount of time. So I tried to transfer registration from one state into Ohio, and they were asking for double taxation basically because the titles had just been transferred recently. Do some due diligence on that. I'm going to create a separate video about all the tax requirements for all the different states. I just don't want to take up your time here. If you did find this video useful, helpful, please take the time to like the video, comment if you can. This is the way the YouTube algorithm picks up my content, gives my channel more exposure, and gives me the incentive to keep making videos like this. So thanks in advance, appreciate your time. Good luck on your next vehicle purchase.